Facebook.
Good afternoon and welcome to our Leader Ethics Wisconsin Candidate Development Forum. I'm Rusty Cunningham and I'm pleased to welcome you on behalf of our Leader Ethics Wisconsin board. I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsors today, our program sponsors, in addition to Leader Ethics Wisconsin, the La Crosse Tribune, League of Women Voters of the La Crosse area, and the Chippewa Herald. We're also thankful to our virtual sponsors, Festival Foods, Leader Ethics Wisconsin, Roger and Kenna Christians, Joe and Pat Heim, Tom Houlihan, Suzanne Young, and Sally Lister. So to all, thank you so much for helping make this possible. Good government depends on good ethical leadership, and good leadership requires good people to run for office and serve constituents. At a time when political divisiveness has pulled some apart, it's so important for solutions-based elected officials to pull us together. Serving on a school board or city council isn't necessarily glamorous and certainly not lucrative, but it's a wonderful way to have a positive impact on your community. To kick off our forum today, here's the Executive Director of Leader Ethics Wisconsin, Lee Rosh.
Well, welcome to all those that are participating, and I'm hopeful that this, hold on a second here, I'm going to stop that share. I'm going to try to get the right video up. Here we are. Okay, thank you for your patience. So this presentation is designed to try to give information about ethical leadership for candidates for school board or city council or anyone that wants to learn a bit more about how to develop an ethical leadership platform. And all right, and I'm just going to escape here. All right, we're going here. All right, let's see if this screen moves with me. All right, Leader Ethics Wisconsin is a nonpartisan nonprofit organization committed to promoting ethical leadership among elected officials. We're in our 4th year. And this program is not all-encompassing. It's intended to give you a better understanding of ethical leadership practices and to help you better understand the challenges you may face as a candidate. We're going to be reviewing the 4 guiding principles of ethical leadership. We're going to talk about some of the challenges and conditions that we're facing in the American democracy today, and we're going to offer some practical suggestions on how you can promote ethical leadership. Here are the 4 guiding principles. And first, let me start out by saying that there are many important values that are associated with leadership. But what we found is that these particular 4 guiding principles really can drive effective ethical leadership, particularly in the political arena. So we believe ethical leaders are essentially truthful, they're transparent with public information, they're unifiers rather than dividers, and they work to the best of their ability to represent their entire constituency, not just a simple majority that maybe have voted for them. Furthermore, We don't believe that ethical leadership is tied to any particular political party. In fact, ethical leadership isn't directly associated with one's views on a particular policy. We believe that an ethical leader is someone who's going to take a look at those four guiding principles, and whether or not their beliefs are here or here on a policy, we're going to be looking at how they apply those principles in their work, in their legislative work. So there are some challenges today, significant challenges today, for individuals who are considering running for office, or certainly our existing elected officials. Misinformation, it's pervasive, and it is having a resulting breakdown in trust in government and other major institutions. Technology is compounding everything. In fact, the issues that we face are moving at an accelerated pace, and there are shortened timelines to turning over information in response to those issues. The political divide is growing dramatically, and many of the national issues are also becoming local issues. And finally, the structural conflict. The conflict in communities is also playing out at the national level, but it's playing out at the local level as well. And there's a lot of pressure on elected officials to choose sides on those conflict issues. It's interesting that we value ethical leadership in so many other areas. There was a well-known book written by Jim Collins called Good to Great, and they featured high-performing, long-standing companies and organizations. And they did an analysis on what was the common element in each of those companies. And what they found is that every single one of those companies was led by a character-driven ethical leader. If your organization wishes to compete for the National Malcolm Baldrige Quality Award, you'll have to have Band 4 ethical leadership as at the helm of that organization. In fact, there are many different resources that are out there that promote ethical leadership. If you were on a board and you were looking to hire an ethical leader, chances are you could search and find someone who meets those criteria. It's true that we value ethical leadership in business, healthcare, and education, almost every area except the political arena. And we're here to raise the question, why not expect ethical leadership among elected officials? Well, there's some significant things that are happening right now that are making that a challenge. This is a study that was done by Pew Research, and essentially they've been tracking the patterns of declared Democrats and declared Republicans over a number of decades. And you can see that the two political parties in 1994 and in 2004 were really pretty close. There were certainly differences in the two political parties, but they're really close. You can see what started to happen in 2014. And this is what their research showed it looked like in 2017. And I can see how challenging it is when the majority of the people who are committed to the two parties are so far apart and not in that middle ground position. Well, Pew went on and they wanted to figure out what was happening, what was causing the political divide. And they found that by isolating on different variables like race, religious attendance, education, age, or gender, they wanted to know if any of those factors were the driving force behind the growing political divide. And they found that those factors weren't important. The one driving factor was political party loyalty. Now, it's also interesting to note this is a Gallup study that was done on trust in government and organizations, and you can see at the bottom of the chart here, Congress has a very low level of trust. But as you move up the screen, you can see that television news, 20%, only 20% trust television news. Newspapers, 23%. Big business, 25%. Public schools, 29%. The medical system, 36%. Church and organized religion, 38%. Less than 40% for all of those. The military and small business have still generated considerable amount of trust. And it's encouraging to note that local government still maintains a fairly high level of trust among average citizens. It has dropped off, though, a bit in recent years. This is a challenge for elected leaders because these are the anchor organizations and entities in your local communities. And when our citizens lack trust in those organizations, it makes everyone's job harder, including elected officials. One of the significant factors in the last decade or so is the tremendous growth, dramatic growth in the use of social media. And this shows that social media has gone from under 1 billion people in 2010 to now it's projected to be over 4 billion users on social media by next year. That's more than half of the world's population. Well, along with social media comes some of the problems and challenges with that, including disinformation and misinformation. There was an analysis done by the United States Senate Intelligence Committee about the foreign interference that was happening in the 2016 election by the Internet Research Agency, the IRA. This is an organization that is based out of St. Petersburg, Russia. And they were promoting controversial issues. In fact, they were picking on both sides on the issue. They weren't trying to have one group succeed over another. They were basically trying to divide our democracy. They frequently had images with minority populations trying to inflame sensitivities about that. I remember an image that came across my Facebook screen, and it was an image of a young African-American woman standing on an American flag. But here's the thing. What they found is between 2015 and 2017, over 31 million Americans liked and shared these phony posts on Facebook and Instagram. So what happened in 2020 and what's happening now? Well, disinformation campaigns are still prevalent on social media. The majority actually are coming from within the United States. It's as if we have learned from a playbook from afar and now applying it here in our own country. The Stearns report is really something that I would encourage people to check out. Also found that there are a number of things that social media companies are doing that actually encourage the divisiveness. In fact, the recent Facebook whistleblower identified that the algorithms associated with anger and hatred have a multiplier effect. And it's actually good for business if you can get more people to like and share anger or hatred laden posts. I also want to point out that YouTube has had a similar problem, but they did identify and take some actions to try to address it. And there was a third-party analysis that showed that YouTube had a significant reduction in anger and hatred-driven posts. Now, some people ask, why are we focusing on elected leadership and ethical leadership? Aren't elected officials really the representatives of the people? And of course they are. But leadership is pretty important. In fact, it's darn important. And I'd like to recall my experience when I was at a higher education institution in Chicago area. College had a really good outside reputation, but they had some significant internal divisions, problems between the major divisions. The academic and student services area was at a conflict with the finance and operation area. And the people at the top of the organization were fighting it out, and the people in the middle of the organization were fighting it out, and the people at the entry levels were fighting it out. And they were convinced that if you're going to try to fix things and improve things in this organization, if you go to this group and ask them how to do that, they would tell you it's over on the other side. That's what you got to fix. It's called a political silo. Political silos are certainly in place in a lot of different places right now with the Republican and Democratic parties. But it's also an example of structural conflict that can occur in lots of different settings. Labor management is an example of an area where potential structural conflict can occur. Urban versus rural. So what I found in my research when I came here is that in order to try to address this kind of structural conflict and bring people together, leaders actually play a very important role. They can set the compelling direction and work hard to get the buy-in from everyone to recognize that if we follow that direction, that's going to be for the benefit of the entire organization or all of us. They can also, but they got to reinforce those messages. You can't just put a statement out there periodically and then be distracted and other things. People won't accept that. It takes a lot of really ongoing emphasis and focus. Leaders can recognize positively teamwork, collaboration. They can work to remove people who are problematic and hurting the unification of the organization. But it's very hard work. I call it the heavy lifting, because the research shows that no matter how much effort you put into it, it's going to be very, very difficult, almost unrealistic, to try to pull everyone together. You can make progress, and it's worth the effort if you feel that progress is important. But here's what the research also showed. When leaders ignore or contribute to the conflict, all hell breaks loose. So when you think about this, the heavy lifting of leaders is you're asking them to do those things that it may be subject to criticism. It may find their colleagues don't support them. That's the heavy lifting of leadership. But the alternative is so much worse. And that's why it's so important to find people who are willing to take that journey and to be successful in that pathway. Okay. So what can you do about it? Well, here are some practical suggestions. We believe it's important to develop a political framework regarding ethical leadership. It's kind of using the resources that are out there and get a better handle on that and how it works for you in your setting. We suggest that you build a personal toolkit to promote ethical leadership and surround yourself with people who embrace ethical leaders. So here's one example. We believe LeaderEthics-Wisconsin is a good resource, a great resource for individuals. In addition to the ethics report, a monthly newsletter that gives examples of good ethical leadership in practice and some not so good examples. But we also bring in some outstanding speakers. And for example, here's an upcoming event where we're going to be offering suggestions on how to promote ethical leadership for public administrators during politically divided times. But there are other resources available too. We are not alone. I'd like to highlight Ballotpedia, for example, because they have a lot of information about issues that are happening in communities, states, all across the country. If you're on a board and you're struggling with an issue, it's very possible that some other community is also wrestling with those same issues. And Ballotpedia can be a great resource to help you find out what's out there. We like this organization, Better Angels. This is a national group. They have a presence in every state. And they work hard to help people who have strong conservative beliefs and strong liberal beliefs to learn to be better at listening and understanding the different perspectives. And they'll come into your community and they'll do a workshop. It could be done with an organization, or it could be an open public session. It could be done with a county board or some other entity as well. The Common Ground Committee, I think they give you some really good information on where common ground practices are in place with our current elected officials. It's primarily at the federal government level, although they do have some of the top state officials here. And they have a scorecard, and they can tell you who's got higher scores on seeking and working through common ground solutions and those that are not so good. And I got to tell you, by the way, you're going to find people in both parties at the top, and you're going to find people from both parties at the bottom. We like what Democracy Found is doing. This is a Wisconsin-based organization that is promoting a fresh look at how we run our primary elections, and we can try to take away some of the perspectives of having someone be primaried if they happen to work on a collaborative solution with the other party. And they also use instant runoff voting, or suggest using instant runoff voting in the general election, so that you take some of the incentives for the hyper partisan negative advertising that is part of many elections today. And we like what Vote Smart is doing because they give you a lot of data. They can tell you who supports candidates. They can tell you how much they're raising. It's a great place to find out information about our political process and the candidates. What about media bias? Well, we think that these two organizations are worth checking out, and I would find a place on your computer and store them. All Sides is an organization that rates over 800 different media sources, and they will put them on a spectrum of very liberal, moderate, middle ground, somewhat conservative, very conservative. And they're trying to give you information that can help you to sort out your media source preferences and where that fits on this political spectrum. They also will give you articles that will give you the liberal, moderate, and conservative view of the same story. It's kind of like looking at an issue in 3D. And we think that's something that could be of value for many people. The second organization is called Media Bias Fact Check. They rate over 3,000 different media sources worldwide. And they too give you that information along the political spectrum where they categorize media sources. But they also identify scientific sites, satire sites, conspiracy theory sites, and they fact check the fact checkers. Both of these organizations readily admit that all media has some bias. They're not trying to persuade you where to look. They're trying to help educate you to be a better consumer of the media that you use. The second area is we encourage you to develop a toolkit, developing grassroots support. LeaderEthics-Wisconsin has a citizens guide. It's available on our website and offers some practical suggestions for average citizens to consider when they're considering and going to vote. We also think that as a potential candidate, you should look at the political parties for their technical support. And there's even some resources available for independent candidates, such as the Virginia Nation. We encourage candidates to use social media wisely. That means fact check and source check information, but also when you find organizations that are like-minded and they're moving in the same direction that you want to move, that you should be following them. And you may not have time to follow all the things they're involved with, but you can catch those things that come across your screen occasionally that have significant value, and they can help you to stay current on some of those issues that are important to your ethical values and beliefs. And then we finally also encourage people, particularly for entry-level positions, to consider acquiring a member management software program. You know, some of these programs are really very inexpensive, and they can help you track your members or your followers or your friends. And that can become an important base should you decide to run for another term in your office or a position at a higher level. There's if you can go to the website and go to Capterra, they will give you a lot of information rating these different member management software programs, so you can pick the one that fits best for you. Finally, we really strongly encourage people to surround themselves with people who support ethical leadership. Believe me, you are not alone. There are many people that are very concerned that the hyper-partisanship that we're seeing today is not protecting the status quo. It's really maintaining a slippery slope. And if we don't take steps to bring people together who are like-minded and want to move in this direction, the alternative could be so much worse. One final story I'd like to share, and this is an image of Congressman Mark Pocan, a very staunch Democrat, very liberal Democrat, congressman from the Madison area, and Speaker Robert Vos of the Assembly, a Republican, a very well-recognized conservative. And last fall, they were running joint ads promoting social distancing, masks, taking vaccines if available. And essentially, you might say, you know what? Why didn't they do this in their legislative role? Or why didn't they take this position sooner? Or why didn't we see more of this? And here's the thing. It's never too late to do the right thing. And it's frustrating when I see an elected official who takes a position and then continues down a rabbit hole because that's where that position is leading him, rather than stepping back and trying to do the right thing. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Rusty Cunningham to get on with the rest of the program and hear from our outstanding panel.
Thank you so much, Lee. It is truly an honor today for me to introduce a couple of people I greatly admire. Veteran public servants who have served us in the Wisconsin legislature for many years. Both have earned a reputation for working across the aisle to improve life in our state. Steve Doyle has represented Western Wisconsin's 94th District in the State Assembly since 2011. The La Crosse native received his bachelor's from UW La Crosse, where Steve subsequently taught, and his JD from the University of Wisconsin School of Law in 1986. He was elected to the La Crosse County Board that year and continues to serve today. For his bipartisanship in the legislature, Steve received the Ethical Leadership Award from LeaderEthics-Wisconsin in 2021. Brian Rood also represented Western Wisconsin in the legislature, first in the Assembly in 1982, and then in the State Senate from 1984 to 2000. He twice served as Senate President. The Viroqua native received his bachelor's from Luther College and his master's from UW-Madison. Since 2000, Brian served as Vice President, External Affairs and Member Relations for Dairyland Power, where he retired last year. Both Steve and Brian have served on a variety of nonprofit boards in our community. Gentlemen, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Rusty. Thanks to be here.
Brian, let's start with you. What motivated you to first run for office?
I think a lifelong interest in politics and public service. I majored in political science in college and worked in various aspects of government. Then I left government to go in the private sector, and when I had an opportunity to run myself, I thought put that background to use, and very fond of my home area, Vernon County, La Crosse County, and wanted to do a good job representing the people there.
Terrific. Steve, what motivated you to first run for office?
Well, it was 1986. I decided to run for the county board. I felt this calling to make a difference, to help people. I knew I could provide leadership. I knew I could make a better community. Okay, well, not really. Actually, I was graduating from law school, and I knew that if I got my name out, it would help me build my business practice. So at some later point, I hope that I did develop some more altruism in my role in government. But to be honest, I wanted to be a lawyer. And politics was really almost a second thought. It gave me a chance to, to learn about government. And I got addicted at that point because of all those things that I just talked about, I found out that those really could be something that a person in local government could accomplish.
Steve, what's the most rewarding part of being an elected official?
You know, it really would be that part of helping people, and that could be collectively or individually. So for example, last term, I was on the bipartisan study committee that looked at things like suicide prevention and adoption. The session before that, I worked on helping people who were in the child abuse and neglect arena. And that was where I could collectively help a lot of people who were trapped in a system and the government wasn't really working for them. Individually, I've been able to help people. Last summer, for example, I ran ads on the radio saying, hey, if you have been having trouble getting your unemployment compensation, call my office. And people took me up on that. I think my office resolved more cases statewide than any other legislative office. So I was able to, one-on-one, go to bat for people. And if you're in politics for any reason other than that, then it's just pure self-promotion and you should really get out.
Brian, for you, what was the most rewarding part of being an elected official?
I think Steve's right. I think everybody in office, whether it's the city council, school board, or legislature, has that opportunity on occasion to help people where they are struggling with the rules or laws, or just not understanding how the government works and how it treats them. So helping individuals is a very rewarding thing. I think in the big picture, particularly my time in the legislature, but I think even today, government works a lot of the time. I used to say that, 94% of what we did in the legislature was bipartisan and common sense. It just got no media coverage because these bills would pass 99-0, 32-0. What gets media coverage is controversy, especially the big ticket partisan items. But in the legislature or school board or city council, you really have an opportunity to dig in and resolve problems and try to provide solutions for the people you represent.
Brian, I know you've had a lot of candidates come to you over the years and you've been able to witness a lot of campaigns. What's the biggest mistake a new candidate makes?
I think the biggest mistake a new candidate makes is to make ironclad promises that they may regret later having made. Couple classic examples: people that say, I absolutely promise I will only run for 1 term or 2 terms or 3 terms. And then they get into government and realize, I'm really pretty good at this and I really like it. And then they have that promise hanging out there. And that's so I always tell candidates, try not to make lifelong commitments that you may or may not keep. A lot of candidates will say, I absolutely will never vote for a tax increase. And then they find themselves in a position, perhaps because of a compromise or changed revenue circumstances, where they have to vote for a tax increase. So when I ran the first time, when I went door to door, I told people, I'm promising I will listen and be back regularly to hear your concerns. That's a promise you can make and keep. And I think promises about practice are okay, and ethical leadership certainly fits in that. Specific promises can really get you in trouble.
Agreed. Steve, what's the biggest mistake that you see?
I would agree with everything that Brian just said. And let me add another thing, and that is thinking that you know it all. When people run for office, they have the solutions to everything. And, if you elect me, this is going to happen. I'm going to solve all your problems, which is really kind of the attitude that everybody who's in government already is an idiot and doesn't know what they're doing. Really, though, when you find out once you're elected that these are people who have the same concerns as you and are trying to solve the problems just like you, you learn an awful lot. But it's so easy in the beginning to just think that you have all the answers and nobody else has ever thought them up. And then you find out when you're elected that, wow, that was a lot tougher than I thought. And I said I would accomplish this in my first term, and guess what? It hasn't happened. So, I think that thinking you know everything is a big issue. A second one would be not listening to the people. You need to, Brian talked about going door to door. If you don't get out there and meet the people, first of all, you probably won't get elected. But secondly, you're going to miss the most important thing, which is you're supposed to be the voice of those people. And if you haven't heard them, then you're only your own voice.
I can tell you from a journalist's perspective, it's frustrating when a new candidate comes and says, well, I don't know anything about that issue, or I've never attended a meeting, or whatever. So that lack of homework always concerns me as a journalist, especially when someone comes before an editorial board. So for candidates or people who are thinking about running, Brian, how can a candidate do homework about such important steps as circulating petitions for signatures, campaign finance, disclosure laws, and other key requirements?
Obviously, it depends on the level you're going to run. I think if you're a school board candidate, sitting down with the school administrator is a great idea. City council, city clerk, county level, the county clerk, and then at the state level, the state elections board. They can give you kind of the how-to about nomination papers and what the office entails, when what it pays, what the responsibilities are. I think developing mentorships, if you're a candidate for office, you should find somebody that you like and trust that have had that office either in the past or currently, because that can also give you a lot of guidance about those things. But the legal perspective, you want to be connected with the clerk or the state elections board to make sure you're doing your nomination papers properly. I mean, I can't tell you how many times that's become an issue because of a misspelled word or a missing phrase. So it's really important to get your ducks in a row. And then the other thought I would have is, I agree with you, Rusty. You don't want to say you don't know anything if you're running for office. But as Steve says, the world is complex. And, for legislators, they're literally dealing with hundreds of issues in a session. And if somebody comes to you and works in a very kind of obscure field, you might not know anything about that. So then that's when you listen. But I think you do want to have some basic understanding of the office you're running for, and a position at least that kind of how you will approach it.
Yeah, I want to pause too on something you just said, Brian. Finding mentors. And I think whether it's politics or business or education or any other field, finding ethical mentors, people who will help you think through your role and how to achieve your goals is really, really important. Steve, from your perspective, what are resources you suggest to new candidates so that they can do their homework about all the different issues that the candidate will face?
So like Brian was saying, there's really kind of two components. One is getting yourself on the ballot, and getting elected. And if you are running for town board, talk to the town clerk. Running for county board, talk to the county clerk. Likewise, up the ladder. In La Crosse County, if you go to the county board website and you take a look at the county clerk's page under the election section, it has a checklist of things that you need to know to get yourself elected, or at least get yourself on the ballot. Your local municipal clerk has been through this a lot of times, and they can help you in that regard too. But then the other part of it, in terms of understanding the issues and doing a good job right from the get-go, talk to the people who are not necessarily the elected folks, but who've been around for a while. So, for example, in La Crosse County, where I'm on the county board, sit down with Steve O'Malley, our county administrator. Steve's been with us for years and years. He can give you all of the ins and outs of what's going on in county government so that you understand the issues a lot better. Town clerks, likewise, are a wealth of information, especially the ones that have been around for a long time. They can tell you where the bodies are buried, basically. I mean, they can give you a really good idea of the dynamics in their particular town, or the school administrators and so forth. And the interesting thing is, without any exception that I've ever seen, those people are anxious to talk to you. They would love to talk to a person who wants to run for their local office, and is reaching out to get their perspective. So don't be shy about that.
Excellent. Brian, what's the biggest challenge to serving in an elected office?
I think the time commitment is a challenge for everybody. And that's true if you're on the school board or the county board, certainly true in the legislature. The time commitment and the you end up being available 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. I know I had a friend who was village president in Coon Valley who said it was not uncommon to get a call about barking dogs at 11 p.m. on a Friday night. So it's not necessarily what you're supposed to be elected for, but people know they're elected officials, and that puts a challenge on it. For me, the hardest thing in the legislature was separating my personal life from the professional life, because I'd go out for fish on a Friday night and inevitably would hear somebody complain about property taxes. So you really have to figure out a way to separate that. There's nothing wrong with an answering machine. You don't have to call that barking dog person back at 11. You've got to figure out a way to separate that your personal life from the demands of the office. But as Steve said earlier, it's rewarding as well, because sometimes those calls on the weekend are the calls where you really can help somebody and build a friend for life.
Steve, what do you consider the biggest challenge?
I think the biggest challenge is probably you need a lot of patience. Government is designed for things not to happen fast. It can take years to deal with a particular issue or solve a problem. And if you think that you're going to solve it overnight, you're going to be disappointed in that regard, because the process normally involves a lot of people who may not think of the answers the same way that you do. And a lot of government things, it's not just your body that's involved, it's your superiors, if you will. If you're a city, you've got to deal with the state. If you're a county, you've got to maybe deal with other counties and so forth. And so you have to have a lot of patience and just let the process play out and play out and never give up hope. I do want to talk about the work-life balance. And I'm not good at that. So I'm not able to tell you the best way to solve that. On the other hand, I can tell you that is one of the things that I think is really cool. When I go to Menards or Festival or Walmart, I invariably have people come up to me and they start talking, and I always pretend that I know who they are, even though a lot of times I don't, because as Brian can tell you, we meet a lot of people. But when people start talking about the issues, frequently they'll start out by saying, sorry to interrupt you. And my response always is, this is why I'm in this job. I like talking about government. I like talking about the issues. And sometimes they're upset about something. That's fine. Sometimes they just have some suggestions. That's great. But as far as I'm concerned, I don't mind not having that good work-life balance. My wife may not agree with with my decisions in that regard, but if you really want to separate yourself from the job, especially at the local level, yeah, you can do that. But like Brian said, your answering machine or your cell phone, don't answer it if you don't have to. It'll give you a chance to really focus on what is important in your life. And for me, government is important, but maybe for other people, it's it's a sideline.
People who run for office for the first time and they're successful quickly figure out that there's campaigning and then there's serving. Brian, how are they different?
Well, campaigning is certainly more physical activity, and really, if you're going to work hard at it the first time, it's an incredibly taxing task. Serving is, I think, I wouldn't say it's easier, but it's different. It's about using your personal skills and you're interacting with people. If you're the president or the governor or a mayor, you might be able to make your own decisions. But if you're in a town board or a legislative body or a school board, you really have to develop those skills of working with your colleagues and, figuring out how you can move forward on the agenda. I think as a new elected official, you usually are in a position where it's best to listen more than to speak, because it takes a while to really understand the ebb and flow of the issues and the process. But collaboration is a very important skill in government, especially in nonpartisan government. In the partisan arena, perhaps it's not as important, but even there, as I said, there are a lot of issues that are not partisan, a lot of very minor issues that minor in the scheme of things, but important to somebody in the state.
Absolutely. Steve, from your perspective, the biggest difference between campaigning and serving?
Promises versus production. When you're running for office, you promise everything. I'm going to solve every problem known to man, and I'll do it in my first 6 months on the job. Presidents always like to have their first 100 days. They're going to solve all of the world's problems in 100 days. Doesn't work that way. When you get elected, you find out that, as I've said before, things don't happen overnight. They don't happen even within a year or two frequently. So you have to recognize that. I absolutely agree with the comment that Brian just made, which is listen before you speak. When I am talking with newly elected members of the county board or newly elected members of the state legislature in my role in our Democratic caucus, I always encourage them, don't say anything during the first several meetings, even though you want to because you know all the answers. Just listen for a while, and you will be amazed at the respect that you get from people by virtue of the fact that you are respectful and you want to learn rather than just making sure everybody understands that you're the most brilliant person ever. So, you know, those are things that when you're a campaigner, yep, you know it all and you're going to solve the problems. But once you get there, you have to be a little more humble and recognize it's going to take some time. And other people are going to be part of that process too. And sometimes they deserve more of the credit than you deserve.
Steve, as a public servant, you heard Lee talk a lot about ethical leadership. What does that mean to you?
For me, what it means is that I need to determine what is best for the people that I represent, not necessarily what is best for me. And that can really be difficult when you're in elective office, because I have both of my jobs, county board and state assembly, are 2-year terms. My wife is a judge. She gets a 6-year term. I'm so jealous of the fact that she can sit back and do what she believes is right and not have to worry about facing the voters every 2 years. I have to, though. And the decision that I make today, this is being November, I'm going to have to account for 5 months from now in April when we have our next election. So sometimes political expediency is very difficult to resist. Boy, you know, A is the right thing, but B is the popular thing. Brian gave the example of raising taxes. Man, it would be wonderful to say, I'm never going to raise taxes. I'm never, ever going to vote for a tax increase. It's not realistic. And sometimes it's not the right thing to do. And so we have to be really careful in thinking not just what is going to get me reelected, but what is the right thing to do for the people that I represent.
Brian, from your perspective, give us an idea of what you believe ethical leadership means.
Well, I think first of all, it's important to follow the law, and that's that sounds kind of trite, and but it is important. We expect our elected officials to meet a standard, and people have to understand what that is, and that starts way down at the school board and the town board. There were times 40 years ago where town board members, you know, took dinners and fishing trips from contractors and developed cozy relationships. That's all changed. And so I think it is important to understand what the law is and follow it. And then I agree with Steve. I think the balancing act for an elected official is doing the right thing. There's a famous quote from Edmund Burke, your representative owes you not his industry only, but his judgment. And he betrays instead of serving you if he sacrifices it to your opinion. That's, in my years in the legislature, it didn't happen very often, but there were times where I felt, based on the evidence that had been presented and the merits of the issue, that I thought I had a different position than perhaps the majority of my constituents. But I did my best to explain to them why I voted the way I did. And in the end of the day, I think benefited from that. Hopefully, when you get into elected office, most of your views are similar to the majority of constituents who elected you. So it's hopefully there won't be those issues. But I think you have to be willing, if you really know that something is right, even if it's unpopular, you have to be willing to take that vote, even if it means getting defeated. And frankly, I think we've seen in COVID, no matter what your opinion is on the issues regarding COVID, we've seen a lot of school boards, a lot of local elected officials have to take some very, very hard votes where they might pull their constituents and they may or may not be following the wishes of the constituents, but they were doing what they thought was right based on the medical evidence or what had been presented to them. So it's a tough job sometimes, but you know, at the end of the day, if you lose your office because you voted for what you think was right, it's probably not a bad way to go out.
Would you say that's the biggest ethical dilemma that you faced while you were in elected leadership, doing the right thing, knowing there could be electoral consequences?
I think so. Yeah, I really do. In my time in office, probably the two biggest issues that I think were hard to weigh ethically. One was the state of Wisconsin going into gambling, state lottery, dog tracks, horse tracks, obviously an ethical issue, but also an issue with tourism ramifications. And so that was a very hard one to make decisions on. Another one in my era was the Milwaukee Brewers Stadium, where very controversial with my constituents, probably got more mail on that than any other issue that I tackled. And at the end of the day, I did what I thought was right. Frankly, I had a lot of friends who thought I should have voted the other way. But, now looking back, 24 years later, I'm grateful that I did what I did and that baseball stayed in Wisconsin. So I think there are times those issues, and it's also sometimes hard to know what your constituents really feel, because Steve may get 500 letters on an issue, and all those letters are being ginned up by somebody saying, write your legislator. And it may be that the vast majority of your constituents are completely opposite. So it's a balancing act. You have to weigh that.
Steve, what kind of ethical dilemmas have you faced in elected office?
I want to kind of diverge a little bit from your specific question and pick up on a comment that occurred to me when Brian was talking. It is easier to deal with those things at the local level. If I am on the town board or county board and I make a decision and people don't like it and they unelect me, so I go practice law more and I make more money. Big deal. If I'm a member of Congress or if I'm in the US Senate and I get defeated, that's my job. That's my career. That's the end of my political career in many situations. And so I think the higher you get, the more difficult it becomes to make those right versus wrong decisions where you set aside political expediency and you do the things that you are right, but maybe are going to risk you not getting elected. I know a lot of people, and a person Brian and I know very well. Dan Kapanke had that issue with Act 10. He was put on the spot. He was right in the crosshairs on that vote. And that probably determined the outcome of the next election when he was defeated, because people were so upset about that vote. I'm not saying it was the right vote. I'm not saying it was the wrong vote. It was a tough vote. So those are the kinds of things that those issues come along every once in a while. You just cringe when they come up, but when you raise your hand and get sworn in, you agree that you're going to make the tough decisions.
So I'm going to ask each of you one more question that I have, and then we have a couple of questions from our audience. Quickly, can you give me an idea, in the spirit of one person making a difference, what can one elected official do as an individual to make a difference? Brian?
I think find an issue at your level that motivates you and try to help resolve it and push it forward. And who knows what that issue will be? It may be something that you didn't even dream about when you ran for office, but maybe you're on the local school board and you really believe that we need to improve civics education, and so you work with the administrator and perhaps hire some additional folks or whatever. I think if, again, as Steve and I were talking about, if you listen and learn, you will find opportunities to make a difference, and you'll feel good about that when it's over.
Steve, how can one person make a difference?
You can set the tone. And I tried to do that in all of my different positions. As county board chair, I called it collaboration. So we created the household hazardous materials programs where we got all of our municipalities on board to create that program. We created the West Salem Business Park, again, bringing in a number of different entities together, including the village of West Salem, to create that. So we constantly focused on how can we work with the people above us, below us, and on the same level. When I got to Madison, collaboration changed to bipartisanship. And I have tried to set that tone here. Sometimes I feel like the lone voice in the wilderness, but there are other people here in both parties that have that same attitude. And if one of us will stick to our guns on keeping a tone of respect in Madison, and if that would happen in Washington, that can be very, very powerful. Sometimes it's frustrating, but if you're willing to step up and set that tone, that's where you really have the most difference. And it's not just one issue. You're really affecting the whole agenda for your community or your state.
Two more quick questions. I'll direct one to Brian and the next to Steve. First of all, Brian, how do you mentor people who may be resistant to mentorship? Do you have any suggestions?
Well, it's hard, but I've met with people who are interested in running for office and tried to listen to where they were coming from, and perhaps found some things that I didn't think were the right approach. And I would just try to go around that and get to other things. But at the end of the day, you know, if someone won't listen, they won't listen. I do think it's important, though, to try to impart to them the large aspect of all elected office, the myriad of issues you're going to face, the people you're going to have to interact with, whether it's your constituents or whether it's the employees of whatever governmental unit you are involved with. So trying to share that big picture is important. And at the end of the day, you hope that candidate will listen.
You do indeed. Steve, both the state of Wisconsin and the county of La Crosse have ethics committees and ethics statutes and rules. Are you satisfied with these procedures, or do you think they should be strengthened or weakened?
By and large, I'm satisfied with them because, you know, you hear people say every once in a while, you know, we don't need more laws, we just need to enforce the ones that we have. But sometimes those have unintended consequences. And let me give an example that I see at the state, and Brian will know what I'm talking about. So years ago, it used to be that trade associations would have their annual get together, whether it's the county's association or the utilities or, you know, business groups or whatever. And people would get together and it'd be free food, free beer, free wine, free drinks, and so forth. And we'd have a great time. Then we had what was referred to as the caucus scandal in Madison, where people were campaigning on state time and being paid to do it. And so we tightened the rules. And so now when we have those gatherings here in Madison, we have to pay to go to them. Of course, legislators are cheap, so they don't go to them. And you might think, okay, that makes perfect sense. Well, let me tell you why that can be somewhat problematic. I don't know many of the freshman Republicans in the state legislature because I never crossed paths with them. You know, when I worked in the legislature years ago, we would go over to the concourse. They'd have double bubble. We'd sit and we'd drink and we'd have free hors d'oeuvres and we'd find about people's families and their dreams and their life. The next day, it's hard to get on the floor of the legislature and just trash them. You know, we formed relationships, and now we just don't form the relationships in Madison. A lot of my colleagues, they just go home after session instead of staying around and socializing. And so we don't have that interpersonal connection that I think makes all the difference in the world. You know, our former colleague Lee Narrison used to sit at the cigar bar right off of the square with some of his friends. I'm not a cigar smoker, but I would stop by every once in a while and talk with them and have a drink with them because I enjoyed it and I got a lot out of it. And I learned as much about them as they learned about me, and that's good for the process. So, you know, again, it's that law of unintended consequences. If you elect ethical people, they are self-policing. If you don't elect ethical people, it doesn't matter what the rules say, they're going to do what they're going to do.
Brian and Steve, we can't thank you enough for sharing your time and your wisdom with us. What a refreshing perspective on the roles that you've played and the importance of those roles and doing them ethically. So we greatly appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I will turn it back to Lee. Thanks, Lee.
Well, I want to reinforce that thank you to our panelists today, Brian and Steve. You know, you really gave us a rich conversation with a lot of insight on the ins and outs of being an elected leader. And we think this is going to really be helpful for a lot of people that are trying to get that candid conversation they don't normally get. And a special thank you to Rusty Cunningham, because you really kept things moving in a conversational way that was very, I think it was informative for us, and it made it an entertaining experience as well. Our next events are coming up in December 7th. We will have a program on communicating with elected leaders, and we will have former staff members from members of Congress and the state Senate who will share their insight on how to be an effective communicator with an elected leader. And then on December 14th, there'll be a workshop led by Jim Shimalik, assistant professor from the University of Wisconsin La Crosse, on ethical leadership for public administrators during politically divided times. So you go to LeaderEthics-Wi.org and you'll get more information on these programs, and I hope to see you then. Thank you all for being part of today's program. Have a great afternoon.